Hey everyone, this is Tom. or Tom Pyle, give you the full name. I'm a user support admin at the Division of Continuing Studies at Rutgers University. On behalf of the 2025 Rutgers University Online Learning Conference, I'd like to welcome Professor Richard Dool from Rutgers School of Communication and Information. We are pleased to have them share his thoughts on how to navigate the challenges of hybrid courses. I see we have about looks like 13 people coming in. We probably have some folks still trickling in. During the presentation, please engage and ask questions using the live chat session. You're going to want to make sure that you are in the session tab, not the event tab. That way your chats are going to go here and they won't be going into the general hall. Pose any questions you have and we will answer them as we go along and as time permits at the end. And with that said, I'd like to hand everything over to you, Richard.
All right, thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. You can go to the next slide. So everyone, so I have a little technical challenge. So Tom's gonna have to advance the slides for me since we'll make it work. So just a little bit of background. I won't bore you too much on this. This is my second career. Obviously, you can tell on the slide I had a long corporate career before this. I always planned on having this second career in academia, and so in 2016 I transitioned full time to that, and I've been at Rutgers this whole time. I'm a director of a master's program plus a teaching professor. So I've done a lot of these kind of courses. You can go to the next slide, Tom.
Oh, there we go.
So just to give you a little bit of more detail on my quote online credentials, I've been doing this a long time, but I was surprised myself the other day when I put the slide together. So 22 years I've been teaching online. Actually, I taught at a few universities before I got to Rutgers. I was tenured at Seton Hall for a while as well before I moved to Rutgers. I've also developed 3 master's programs for online or hybrid delivery. I lost track of all the courses. My last time I counted, it was more than 20. I've also published on it. I've got some online certifications. But the other thing I find it's really helpful for me is I've actually been a student. So I got both my master's and my doctorate in some form of online education. I had one master's that was fully online at Thomas Edison State University. I got a hybrid master's at Seton Hall, and then I did my doctorate at the University of Maryland, and that was a hybrid, half on campus, half online. Next slide. So what is a hybrid course? There's a lot of definitions out there. Just to make it easier for our presentation, we're really talking about a course that combines both on campus or live interactions, physically present live interactions, and some kind of online interaction, be it synchronous or asynchronous. The models differ depending on universities. There's lots of different approaches out there. You can see the rotation models used by some, where that's what we do at Rutgers. We alternate between online and face-to-face on-campus situations on a schedule. And then you also have the flex model, which some universities do. They keep it flexible and they change it during the semester. And even in some sessions, part may be on campus and part may be online. So for our purposes, I'm using the Rutgers approach, or my school's approach, which is a rotation model. Next. So just to give you some stats on this, it's a kind of a busy slide here. But it's growing quite remarkably. Obviously, we all know during the pandemic we learned you can teach online, and you can work online. And so we don't have data for 24 yet, but if you look at 22 and 23, you can see that more than half the students out there are still engaged in online education. It's decreased a little bit, which is interesting because we are trying to push and encourage students back to campus. I don't know if in your schools it's the same. I'll show you some details on our program in a few minutes here. We also found that almost half the students prefer hybrid, even though faculty is not quite supportive of it. The faculty is only about 35%. I have that same challenge at Rutgers because a lot of the faculty get the concept but don't necessarily want to teach in the method, and yet the students like it. The students like it particularly because of the flexibility. They can plan their schedules out a little bit. In my particular program, 60% of the master's students work full-time. So they like the ability to have that flexibility in the scheduling. And then you can see there was a survey that 50% that took hybrid courses were satisfied. So we got some room for growth here. We got room to fix things. You can see 37% express some level of dissatisfaction. I'll show you what some of that dissatisfaction is as we go through it. Next. So what are the obvious benefits? Well, Clearly, the flexibility and convenience from a student perspective, they like it. It reduces the need for coming to campus a lot. And in our particular case, our classes are at night, and 60% of our students work full time, so they're coming from 6 to 9 at night. If they're here for 3 courses, which is a typical load, that's a long day, and they don't really like that too much. They like the flexibility of the scheduling, and they can plan out a little bit. They have business travel or their family events or other classes. They like the idea they can schedule out and they can see the semester how it goes. It can also enhance the learning experience because you get all the modes. You get both the online experience, both synchronous and asynchronous, but you also get the face-to-face experience. So you can use a lot of different assets, educational assets between videos and arranged discussions, etc. And so it does allow for a much broader engagement by the students. Next. And if you do it well, and I'll talk about some of the challenges in a few minutes. If you do it well as a faculty member, we do see engagement go up. And they like the idea that they can do it in different forms. It also kind of forces engagement. I mean that in a positive sense because you can't get behind. You have to participate. And so it kind of puts a little bit of pressure on them to stay current with the class. And that's helpful as well, but not in a way that puts too much stress on them, but they have to kind of stay on the schedule. So that helps. It does improve time management because, again, we can plan out our time. And usually we give pretty good instructions about what you need to do when. I use a checklist each week in my classes. So here's what you got to do for this week, and it keeps them accountable. And also, you don't have to be on, over their shoulder all the time telling them what to do. Next. Again, we're finding out that there's a lot more resources used, particularly multimedia resources, both in class and online. We use a lot more videos. We do a lot more. We can do all the traditional articles and things as well. We do a lot more participative kind of things going forward. We do recorded lectures when we're on the live lectures. We do sometimes we'll mix up asynchronous classes. So the actually ability to bring all these other resources in and change the educational interaction helps engage the students. We are seeing better performance because if I look at a purely on-campus course or a purely online course, the hybrid courses actually perform better. We get better student feedback, if you will. And even though the grades are roughly the same, we can see the quality of the work is a little better. And part of it, we think it's because, they're going to see us, at least in our case, every other week. They're going to see me face to face. And it's kind of hard to duck the feedback because I can give them feedback directly, going forward. And I can also help them, improve each week by giving them, much more, the best way to say, much more spontaneous feedback than the normal feedback we give in each class. The other thing is that we have pretty good retention rate. We look at our add drop periods, and we lose very few students in the hybrid classes compared to like the purely asynchronous classes, for example, or the purely on-campus classes. It's not dramatically different statistically, but we can see a difference in their retention. Yeah, Tom. And then obviously the faculty, the administration likes the fact that we can use the facilities better, so we can decide which classroom we need for the on-campus sessions. We don't use it every week, so that class can be used for something else. So that's a positive in that sense that if it's planned out well, you can use the facilities a little better. In our case, we actually change classrooms from time to time because if we're doing something particularly in that classroom, let's say we need a lab environment, for example, or we need an environment that's more conducive to group presentations, we have the ability to specifically assign a classroom, again, as long as we plan out the schedule in advance. So overall, it feels to us like it provides a balanced, effective, and kind of inclusive learning environment, and we get the best of both worlds when we look at both the online and on campus. Okay. Now, there are some challenges, and I don't want to minimize them in any way. Obviously, when you're on the online portion, we all know the digital divide. We know that, I was kind of shocked when we first trans over during the pandemic and we went over to 100% asynchronous or synchronous courses. I was surprised how many graduate students at Rutgers in my program had challenges with internet access. Either they couldn't get it reliably, or they couldn't pay for it. And it's not a huge number, but still more than I expected. So that's still a bit of a challenge. It's not so much lately. We're seeing pretty much everyone, can get access. What we're seeing more of a challenge is they want to get on, they want to engage via their phone or via their versus their laptop or versus a desktop computer. And I have some students, I'm sure you all experience this as well, that join the class and they're walking or they're driving, which makes me, it always unnerves me a little bit. So that's a little bit in there. Occasionally, we do have some software challenges. We use Canvas. I'm sure some of you may be aware of that. Canvas is holding up pretty well lately, but sometimes it glitches. Like, for example, today, I don't have Chrome on my computer, so Tom's stuck listening to me to help me to advance the slides going forward. So that does come up from time to time. And I do have some challenges with faculty. At least I had some that don't really leverage Canvas as an example or leverage an asynchronous style or leverage a synchronous style as well as they should. We use Zoom particularly for the most part. They don't use all the capabilities of Zoom, for example. They don't know how to do polling. They don't know how to do breakout rooms, or they resist it somehow. So we have a little bit of challenge there going as well. Next slide. And then you can get some students that will obviously duck a little bit. Life gets in the way. Sometimes there are legitimate issues. We can see a little bit of procrastination from time. They get really stressed out if it's an online class, an on-campus class, and they have to miss it for some reason because they want that face-to-face experience. But let's say at a travel issue or they're sick, I see a little bit of stress there. They also can't get the rhythm right from the discussions, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes, and that could be a bit of a challenge. So we do have to keep on them, but overall, we find the engagement a little bit better. And then you clearly can have some inconsistent course design. A lot of faculty struggle between what do I do in an online week and what do I do on the on-campus week? And how do I keep that work balanced and feel connected, if you will? And typically what we find from the student side is they complain about the online section. All of a sudden, the workload goes up dramatically when online, and that's legitimate. For example, I'm sure a lot of you know this if you teach. When you teach asynchronously, that's a lot more work than teaching once a week in a class. Especially on campus, facilitating for a week takes quite a bit of time. And if we overload the discussion part, particularly if it's asynchronous, they get out of rhythm on that. So that's a bit of a challenge as well. Next. We also have to make sure that our communication is very consistent. We've seen some of our faculty struggle a little bit with that. In my case, I'll show you in a few slides here what we do in Rutgers and what I do in my classes. But I over-communicate. So far it hasn't annoyed the students too much, but I over-communicate because I want to make sure they understand exactly what we're doing week to week and there's no surprises, and we can plan out each week going forward. I also try to interact with them in different ways. I'll send an email, hey, how you doing? I'll send a text occasionally if some of them call me. I give my cell phone number out so they can text me going forward. So it can be a little erratic sometimes in the way you communicate and inconsistent. That can cause some confusion. It's definitely more work. There's no way around it. Managing a hybrid course takes more time. You have to think about each week and what you're going to do and how you connect the dots between the lessons, etc., how you keep the syllabus moving along, how you keep engagement going. It's a lot more work in the asynchronous week if you do an asynchronous because of facilitation requirements. And I'm sure you all know delivering a class face-to-face and even delivering the same class through asynchronous through Zoom is not quite the same experience. So there is definitely more work, require more planning on the faculty part. Next. You do have some scheduling logistics issues as well. Particularly in my case, we have working students who can't always make every class, because of travel. Then you occasionally get people getting sick, etc. They're late because they're commuting. So you have some of that challenges. If you want to be fluid in terms of the rooms you use to give the school the best assets, the best ability to use those classrooms, that takes coordination. Especially if you change classrooms, you got to make sure that the students understand, hey, we're moving to this class for this week. We don't do that too often, but we do it occasionally because we do particular classes in particular rooms that are available to us. But typically, if you stay in the same room, you're better off. And then obviously, you could have some unequal learning experiences, particularly if you have a mixed class. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes. In our case, we have a high level of international students, and a lot of those students, an disproportionate number, take the hybrid classes, and that also becomes a little bit of a challenge. Next slide.
Whoop. There we go.
All right, so just to give you a Rutgers definition, these are all the definitions. I was kind of a busy slide here to look at. But again, I don't know if everyone's from Rutgers or different schools. I just want to give you the Rutgers side. So you can see the hybrid one is that second one down, which I'll show you on the next slide as well. And so you could have the face-to-face time, which is obviously an on-campus class, and then you can have the online synchronous, online asynchronous, and online mixed. We actually don't use the online mixed very often. In fact, I can only think of one course we've done that, and that becomes even more of a challenge than the other ones. Next slide, Tom. So for us, again, this is the hybrid. So what we're talking about a hybrid. Again, I'm using the Rutgers definition. It means a certain portion of the class have to be face-to-face live on campus, and a certain portion have to be asynchronous or synchronous. What we typically ask our faculty to do is make it all synchronous for your online session or all asynchronous. Don't mix them up. That's not always true. Sometimes because of even weather or whatever, they'll change that. But typically, mixing up synchronous and asynchronous gets a little more confusing for the students. Next slide. So just to give you our experience, obviously I'm sure a lot of you have had the same experience. So we went from mostly on campus to 100% online during the pandemic. And obviously during that time, a couple things happened. One, we found out that we can actually teach effectively online, even though it may not be the most optimal all the time. It's definitely doable. We also found out that students, in my case particularly, my master's programs, that's now their preference. Instead of commuting here after working all day, they prefer the online experience, and so that becomes a bit of a challenge for us. And so we're going through this transition phase, if you will. So you can see before the pandemic came, we were about 60% online on campus and 40% online. That was by design. It had nothing to do with the pandemic. That's because of our working students. Then we went to 100% online, of which most of it was asynchronous. Very few synchronous courses. That was a faculty issue. And then you can see in 23, I've kind of been moving forward. We start off about 25 to 75 on campus and async. Then we went to 30-70, and for this spring of 26, like right now in this spring semester, we're about 30% on campus and hybrids, and about 7% online, mostly asynchronous. And then we've already scheduled our courses for next spring, and you can see I'm trying to eke it up a little bit. I'm trying to entice students back to campus to the extent that I can. It's never going to be where it was at 60-40. It's always going to probably be 40-60, kind of a highlight, I think, based on the trends I see in our program. Next slide.
My apologies. I'm having
No worries.
hanging a little.
So the reason we do this, there are several reasons. One, it does meet the needs of our students. Again, 60% of our students work full-time or part-time, and they just resist commuting, if they're a full-time student 3 times a week. But we find this really interesting mix of feedback. They do miss face-to-face classes, even though they will prefer to come on to take it asynchronously or synchronously because they want to avoid the commute, if you will. And so they prefer live classes face-to-face, but when they schedule it, they tend to schedule it more online. So they're kind of talking at both sides of their mouth a little bit. We're trying to figure out how to navigate that. I have a serious challenge, though, with our international students. I'm sure you know, as I'll show you on the next slide as well, that the government has put restrictions on their visas, and I have to offer on-campus or hybrid classes for them to meet the needs. So that's a serious challenge for me in my program. And I also have challenges with faculty. Not as many faculty in my program particularly like the hybrid model. They like either purely online or purely on campus. And there's only probably not, if I had to guess, probably a third are comfortable with the hybrid. So that's a bit of a scheduling challenge for me as well. Next slide. So again, if a lot of you may have these students, they're called the F1 students, the students, international students, just to give you the data here. They can only take one fully online class. They have to take 3 classes to be considered a full-time student to honor their F1 visa. They can only take 1 class that's online, fully online. The other 2 have to be a hybrid or on campus. So I have this challenge right now. As I mentioned, I have a fair amount of Chinese and Indian students and also students from 9 other countries. And so we have to offer a number of these just for them to legitimately take the program and not get into visa challenges. So that's one of the big issues that I have to deal with as well. Next slide. So just to give you the numbers, so this is the spring 25 schedule right now. So I only have 4 classes out of almost 30 here that are 100% on campus. I only have 4 that are online, 100% synchronous. And then you can see I have 13, which is always our biggest category, that 100% online and asynchronous. And then you can see the hybrids are 9. So the hybrids are growing. When the 2 semesters ago was only 4, now we're at 9. So we've moved up a little bit. But asynchronous is still the modality of choice for our students. Next slide. So again, just you understand the on-campus component, the online component again, and to show you our target. This is not this is ideal. We don't always hit this, but in my master's program, we try to do 50-50. It's not quite 50-50. You can see in the math there. And in a 15-week semester, we try to do 7 on-campus classes and then 8 online. But by the rule, by policy, you have to at least a third. All right, so the faculty has some flexibility here, but at least 5 in a 15-week semester have to be on campus. So that's kind of the baseline. And I try to encourage a few more than that, but that's up to the individual faculty member. Next slide. Okay, so again, in our case, classes are at night, Monday to Thursday. We don't have classes on Friday. 6 to 9 p.m. And they're, that's live where they're, obviously in classroom and we have discussion lectures, etc. And then the asynchronous part, I'm sure you all know this, is there's no live sessions at all. The discussion's posted and it's open, 24 hours a day, for the week. And then if it's a synchronous session, it matches our on-campus sessions. They're at night, again, 6 to 9, live, through via Zoom in our case. Next. So there are some considerations though when you start thinking about how to do this. One is you got to think about the mix of students. In my case, particularly, I have to think about the cultural differences. Again, with a lot more international students in these classes and how they adapt to our style of learning. We have a wide range. Our average age is 28 in our program, but we go from 23 to 68. So it's kind of interesting. We have a lot of early career or mid-career people on our program, so we have to adapt to that a little bit. We also have to think about the format. Well, what are we going to do? Is the online session going to be purely async, purely sync, or a mix? Again, I tend to discourage the mix because it makes more challenging the scheduling and keeping the content moving. So I tend to encourage the faculty to either make it 100% async or 100% sync in their online session, but that's up to them. We allow them the flexibility. Then you have to also decide how many in each mode. So in my case, in my example, I use the first one there. I just alternate every week. 1 week on campus, 1 week online, and I keep it pretty consistent. But I have some faculty that do 2 weeks at a time. So across the 15 weeks, I do 2 purely online, then 2 on campus, and 2 online, and so forth. There's really no format on that. I tend to like the first one because it keeps the rhythm kind of natural for the students, so they tend to do that. Next slide. Now, some of the challenges, I mentioned some of these earlier. I'll just go a little more detail now. You clearly got to lay out the schedule. And it's better if you think in advance and lay out the whole 15 weeks because it can be a bit of a challenge for the students if you change things during the semester. Now, we do change things from time to time. Obviously, weather can get in the way or something may change and we like the way that the lecture's flowing or that topic's flowing. It might change a little bit. But we typically try and keep it consistent with them. If we do change the schedule, we negotiate that with the students. We talk to them about, hey, here's what we're thinking about doing. Are you okay with this? And if we don't get consensus, we don't do it because we're not going to leave anybody out. So we also have to help our students manage their time and adapting to the different styles. And, again, if you're in the asynchronous week, it's more demanding of their time versus the on-campus week. We have to explain that to them. So I have to give them very, strict or very detailed instructions about what that goes going forward. And also, even though having some flexibility, also having some consistency is important. Also, keeping the materials connected and the lectures balanced is important. Even coordinating the graded assignments and matching it up with due dates and then instructor workload. So there are challenges to think through as you go through these. They're not quite as obvious as sometimes it looks going forward. Next. So here's some examples. I put some examples out on one of my syllabi just so you get some ideas. So this is direct text out of mine. So I have a bunch of discussion directions in mind. So you can see with this one, it's pretty clear here. It's a hybrid class, so I make sure they understand right up front. I also let them understand that discussion, whether it's hybrid, on campus or online, is a significant part of their grade. In this case, 20%. So you can't hide on this. You can't duck. You got to participate going forward. Next slide. So in our case, again, my case, I have literally 5 pages in my syllabi describing how discussion participation is going to be managed. There's no doubt, if they read that, they understand exactly what I'm talking about. So in an online weeks, I use asynchronous for my online week. Discussion open Monday to Friday. I don't want them in discussion on the weekend just because of workload balance. I also have some assignments sometimes they're doing the weekend, so I try and keep them out of the weekends. The way it works is they have to post an initial response to the discussion question. That might be the most 2 or 3 paragraphs. But decent. And it might be source based and have a little bit of experience in that. But after that, I want a dialogue. I want a discussion going back and forth. I don't want a lot of multi-paragraph dense responses to each other because it just makes it really tedious. And some like I'm teaching a course right now, communication ethics. We can break 100 postings in a week pretty easy. If they're all 2 or 3 paragraphs, it's way too much to get through. So I like after that initial discussion, let's get into discussion amongst that. And we're big believers in what we call the peer-to-peer learning. Yes, you can learn from me, student, I can learn from you, but you also can learn from each other. And so we use what's called the dialogue intensive model. So we want to encourage that dialogue between them. And my syllabi goes into a lot of detail about tone and style, the timing of their participation, the length of their postings, etc. Even the quality and quantity, we have a rubric on it. We have a whole slide on what works best and what doesn't work well. I think that's actually on the next slide, Tom. Oh no, I'm sorry. Maybe the next slide. So this is an example. So I try and make it clear to them, how the week works. So in my case, in an asynchronous class, the discussions are open Monday to Friday, and they're closed. I use what's called reflection postings, which I'll show you in a minute here. I use reflection postings for the weekend, so I don't want active discussion on the weekend. So again, there's no way that they can misunderstand this. This is what's expected. It's pretty clear in the syllabus. Next slide. And also, as I mentioned, I make it pretty heavy. A lot of all my classes are either 20 or 30% in terms of discussion. We encourage our faculty no less than 10%. In fact, I'm uncomfortable with 10. I don't think that's enough, but that's faculty discretion. But we typically 20 to 30%. So it's a significant portion. We want to make sure the students understand the weighting of that. This is out of one of my classes, just to give you the idea here. And so you can see that the week discussion, no matter what type, either online or on campus, is significant. They got to pay attention to it. Next slide. Yeah, this is a real busy slide. Hopefully, you'll be able to get copies of this going forward. So I have a whole section on what goes well in the discussion, what doesn't go so well. And we talk about it. It's even more detailed than this. It goes in more detail than this, but it gives you some ideas. Pretty much, you need to participate. You try not to miss a day, or definitely don't miss 2 days in a row because it's going to be really stressful. You come in and there's 40 postings in, you got to catch up. So I try and encourage them about that. I tell them about jumping in. Don't be bashful. Share your insights, your experience, your examples, if you will. And also, I definitely try and encourage debate, but make sure it's respectful and polite going forward. And even though I agree, and your wonderful kind of postings are good for morale, they're not good for learning. So I always tell them about that. That's great, but do something more than that. And you can see on the right-hand side, I'm sure a lot of you already experienced this. They come in, they post real early in the week or real late in the week, and they're not consistent during the week. That's a challenge. If they're too cryptic, they're too long. Again, me too. I agree. Your wonderful things don't really help us too much. A lot of typos, all the kind of things. So this just gives you an example of what's in our syllabi to try and get them to understand about the discussion engagement. In this case, the asynchronous week. Next. So what does work for us? One, a very detailed syllabus. In fact, probably over the top syllabus. Again, mine's like 20 pages long and 5 pages just on discussion participation. But I'm in my attitude is like I'm going to eliminate excuses here. I told you, you should have paid attention to it. We actually do a syllabus test in our first live class. It's fun. It's not really for points or anything, but we say, you better read the syllabus because we have a test in class. And we have some fun with it. And we say, how many of this do we do? How many of that do we do? And what's it do to this? And why do we do that? But it just makes them have to read the syllabus. And then it also creates other conversation about expectations. That's a fun thing that we do. clearly have to communicate a lot. I use what's called the rule of three. So I will tell them in an email. I'll make the announcement in class, in this case Canvas, and I will also make class live, make the announcement live in class going forward. And I even might send a second reminder out. So my attitude is, I told you 3 times. If you're not paying attention, it's kind of on you now. Again, I'm expecting to be kind of a mature, adult and participating properly. But again, I try to eliminate excuses by saying, "Oh, I didn't know." Well, you should have known because I posted it three different ways going forward. Next slide. We also use a lot of what we call recaps. This has actually turned out to be pretty important. I mentioned earlier, one of the challenges, how do you link the content and the topics week to week between the online and the on-campus stuff? And so what we do typically is we will do, for example, I'll start off every live class with a recap of what we did in the asynchronous week before, or a preview in the live class, what we're going to do in the async week going forward. So kind of a bookends, if you will. We'll preview what's going to come, and we'll also recap what we did. Again, it just helps the students connect a little bit going forward. Sometimes we'll do the recap in a voiceover. I'll do a quick little PowerPoint or something with a voiceover lecture, the recap points for the online week. That's another way we do it. The other thing we do in the live classes, we do what's called student mini lessons, where I'll put a team together of 3 or 4 students and say, okay, give us a quick 5-minute recap of this topic we talked about in our last week. And it really works out well because it forces them to kind of rethink a little bit, reflect on what we did, gets them to work together a little bit in a very unstressful team thing, if you will. But it also kind of embeds some of the lessons learned. It connects the dots a little between the lessons. I also do what I call learning journals, which I'll show you in the next slide here, the next few slides actually. So again, big believers in reflection, big believers in trying to make sure they can think about a little bit what we talked about in class, what we discussed online, what's in the lecture, what's in videos, etc. So get them embedded. I know you probably all know this, but most humans, within 24 hours, lose about 50% what they heard the prior day, and about 70% gone in by 3 days. So we use reflections to make sure we embed some of those key lessons. Next slide. So we use weekly journals. When I say we, a lot of us, not everybody does here, but I do it all the time. I've been doing it for 9 years, as you can see here, and I use them in all my modalities. And the experience has been very good. And anecdotally, the students seem to like it. It shows up pretty well in the student evaluations because it's not very stressful. I'll show you that in a minute. And also it helps, when we do assessments of the learning objectives of the class, it gives me kind of proof that the lessons, that the learning objectives were met in the classroom. So we've been doing this for quite a while. Next slide. And so I also do it for 3 different reasons. One is I'll go to the second one first. It gives a source of more learning. In other words, you embed that key lessons and you link the topics week to week depending on, your modality shift. But I actually do it for the first reason mostly. It gives me weekly feedback. And it's not very stressful for students. I'll show you that in a minute. It takes not a lot of time to do this. But if I see a bunch of consistent messages, consistent themes for the week, good week. Means the lecture worked and the content kind of hit with the students and resonated with them. If I see a lot of weird things, a lot of erratic kind of feedback, then I screwed up somewhere because clearly the lesson didn't resonate and it wasn't coherent enough to them. So it gives you, in a non-threatening way, kind of non-stressful way, almost instant feedback. It also gives you an interesting way to blend theory and practice. And in my case, since 60% of students are working full-time, they want to, what can I use this stuff at work? I'm not here just for pure research and pure theory. I want to actually put stuff into place professionally. It gives us a chance to blend that as well. Next slide. It does keep the students current, without putting a lot of pressure on them, looking over their shoulder. They got to post that reflection on the weekend. Again, it's short. I'll show you that in a second. It's only 2 or 3 paragraphs, but they have to post. That means they have to engage the material at some point. And, if you miss it, and you have to catch up 3 weeks from now, it's a lot more stressful, a lot more work, which they figure that out pretty quickly that this doesn't work if they don't keep up with it. So it puts a little bit of pressure on them, and they can see their peers. There's no dialogue on this, no discussion on these, but they're posting in a particular area, and the students can see what their peers are posting. So that puts a little bit of pressure on them, but it also creates some consistency in the message. It does drive synthesis because they have to kind of bring lecture, discussions, videos, and any other readings together into some coherent manner, come up with a lesson on that. Next slide. So this is just an example out of one of my syllabi from a while ago. You can see there, it's the learning journal on the right there. It's again 20% of the grades due each week, and then there's a final reflection at the end of the semester there going forward. Next slide. So this is what it looks like. So you can see there's a learning journal posting for the week of February 8th. There's also a week of February 1st. So I can tell right away. In this particular class, there's 20 students. All right, so I can see they're all in there, and they can see each other's. We don't have discussion on these; they can see each other's. But I remind them that it's there each week. Keep up with it, and again, it gives me some instant feedback going forward. I don't grade discussions each week. In my case, I grade them twice a semester. But I can also see in this, I can pick out some issues and kind of help them a little bit. But you can see, in week 4 there, 2 people were already late a little bit, which is fine. I keep these open the entire semester, but I stress to them, look, don't get too far behind in this because there's a lot more work for you to recreate the recap or the reflection after the week's over. So again, a little bit of peer pressure to keep them in a timely manner. Next slide. So this is just an example. What I do is post it every week. And so that you can see it's pretty straightforward. There's no format other than you have to do this, use this exact format. It's open to them. It's flexible to them. And I try to, I tell them not more than 3 paragraphs. Most of them you usually do, 2 paragraphs, even one long paragraph, but not more than 3. In other words, kind of a half a page. If you want to look at an 8.5, 11 by 11 page, if you will. Next slide. So again, it's usually 20% of their grade in my case. It's a single posting, no discussion, as I said, usually on the weekend when the online week is over or the on-campus class has been completed. I try and encourage them to do it before the next class. I do keep them open because, again, I want them to have to go back, but I stress to them it's too much work if you have to go back and recreate it. But every semester I do have students get behind on these. And then I also remind them of this in the weekly checklist, in the email, and I also announce it in class. So there's no way to hide. They know it's there, and it's in the syllabus in detail. Next slide. Now, what I've learned, and I've done hundreds of these at this point, is that it takes them less than a half hour. If it takes them longer than that means they missed something, they missed the class, they weren't paying attention, they weren't engaged enough. And they tell me, I ask the feedback all the time, hey, how long did it take you? And I always get answers 15 to 20 minutes. And that's fine. It's perfect. I actually don't really care about the answer that much, even though I look at the pattern just to make sure that it makes sense. But there's really, I stress it, there's really no wrong answer here. You pick it. What resonated with you? What were your key takeaways? What surprised you? Is there something you challenged? If we had to go back again, it didn't quite sit with you. It does give me some insight how they're feeling about the course material. And they also, remember, they can read each other's as well. So they keep learning from each other, even though they don't have to. There's no discussion in this particular thing. They can keep learning from each other. Next slide. And this is, I know, way too boring. I just want to give you an example of one just to show you what a student did. This is a typical 2-paragraph. Now, again, I wade through this. Okay, that looks like if I see like 19 of these that have kind of similar things, it was a good week. I feel like the material resonated and kind of stuck. But the important in the hybrid class is I can also connect the dots. Week to week, do I see a difference in the reflections between the live class and the online class? And if I see distortion there or difference there, then I got to tighten things up, coordinating that message I mentioned. Next slide. All right, so let's, I know we're going to run out of time in a few minutes here, so let's kind of recap. What have we learned in terms of best practices? Well, clearly you have to have a well-defined course structure. Best if you lay it out the whole semester, let them know what's going to happen each week, online week, on-campus week, and so forth. And also use a consistent format for your assignments. Don't change it because it's online or change it because it's on campus. Try and keep that consistent. A big issue is balancing the workload and getting them to anticipate the online week, particularly if it's asynchronous, is going to be a little bit more work for you. So going back to my point about really being detailed in your syllabus, the expectation there, and then explaining it to them, and then encouraging them when it happens week to week. When I got on the online class, on campus classes, I would give them feedback on the online week, particularly as asynchronous the week before. what went well, what didn't go well, how did they feel about it. So you get instant feedback as well. Next slide. Obviously, you have to use technology. Again, I find this a bit of a challenge with a lot of our faculty. They don't really leverage, in our case, Zoom or leverage Canvas as well as they should. They don't use all the tools. As I mentioned earlier, in the hybrid, I mean, the asynchronous weeks, or the synchronous weeks, when they do that, they don't use breakouts. They don't use polling questions. They don't, do some of the things you can use there. So we encourage our faculty to leverage the technology to the extent that you're comfortable. I don't use textbooks anymore in my classes. I use a lot of video. And so that's an example of me trying to leverage that going forward. Obviously, you have to promote active engagement, and you have to explain to the students and get them to understand that it's different competing, collaborating on campus or discussion on campus than being online. And we try and help them understand that, again, quite detailed in my syllabus. Also, we use a lot of group assignments in our program for some reason. We think that being a good teammate is a good professional skill. That becomes a little erratic sometimes between the on-campus and the online, getting that synced up a little bit. So I also spend time trying to help them understand how to do a group assignment across these modalities. Next slide.
Just so you know, we are just under 10 minutes left. We are nearly done with the presentation, but just Perfect. If you have questions in mind, folks, just start thinking them, typing them in chat, and let's keep going.
All right. Appreciate that. So obviously, you have to think about how you're going to do your assessments. In other words, how you're going to grade. And, in my case, for the online discussions, I have a detailed description of grading in terms of quantity and quality of postings, what's an A, what's a B, etc. Because I always get the questions, well, how often do I have to post in the online week? What's the number of postings, or how long should they be? So I would answer those questions. There's a lot of detail in that. The other thing is that in Canvas, I'm sure you know this, you can take a look in Canvas and you can go to the analytics, and you can look at how many people posted in the online week versus those that did. Now, if you're experienced online instructor asynchronously, you get the rhythm down pretty quickly. You know who's missing. But I always go and look at those stats anyway, and I provide every fourth class, I'll provide a generic set of feedback about how we're doing, and I'll specifically point out to some students, hey, look, you're a little behind in the asynchronous discussions. You might want to get caught up. So I'll give them some timely feedback to keep that going. Next slide. So to conclude, then we'll open up for any questions, etc. It is a good experience if done well. And again, the feedback we get from our students is they like it. The ones that do it. The international students have to do it, but they also like the face-to-face engagement anyway, particularly. But the only way it works is you got to do a lot of thinking about it. You got to coordinate. You got to make sure you communicate quite a bit, and you have to be fairly flexible and adaptable, because there could be some conditions that change, or some things you may want to change going forward. Again, the recommendation is do your on-campus part, of course, but then decide to be either 100% async on your online portion or 100% sync. Be a little careful mixing that up. I tend to be mostly 100% async, just that's my style of teaching. I have other professors that do online and synchronous because they want everything live. That's fine. Just be a little careful about the mix between when you do your online weeks. All right, I think that's the last slide, Tom. So I certainly open up for questions. So appreciate that. I hope that was helpful to everybody.
Feel free to give your feedback or questions. Just to remind folks, if you've been putting them in the event chat, then we don't see them. You'll want to repeat them here. Otherwise, just feel free to use the chat or the Q&A feature. And thanks, Amina.
Thank you, Amina. Yeah, if you have any questions, I think feel free. Let me know. They do, Karen. There's required to take 3 classes, and 2 of them have to be in person or hybrid. We looked like we've checked this with the government. We've also checked with our Global Services Office. A hybrid does qualify as an in-person requirement. So a hybrid class, in other words, the in-person port, they do have to take it. So purely on-campus courses and hybrid classes will satisfy their F1 visa, but 2 of their courses of 3 have to be in that mode. And that's been a real challenge because sometimes the students get different feedback, and then sometimes they're on a different visa and don't quite understand it. That's a mistake. So we're very careful about this because luckily so far we've not been audited and had to challenge us. But you never know with this administration, there could be some audits coming, and then the student could get deported technically. So we're very careful about this one.
I'm just going to highlight Richard's email again in case anyone's looking back, because the platform kind of turns it off after a moment. You can write him an email to get a copy of that syllabus he was using. And we also have a question from Mariana Lopez. Let me just
And
highlight
Harvard,
that.
do you ever solely do content online?
Well, that sounds like a flipped
Oh,
classroom there.
yeah, that's an well, I can't answer that too quickly because yes, we do. We do some things solely for online delivery and some things solely for in person. Yeah, we absolutely do that. For example, um, um, well, no, the group activities we actually do both, but sometimes we've done group things like group presentations. We hold for the live classes on campus classes typically. And then, do you think there's some content? Yeah, I do, Ariana. I do think that there's some content that's better delivered face to face versus online. Again, it depends on your course. In my case, in my classes, I do all my group stuff in the online class. I'm sorry, on the live class. I also do the student mini lessons in the live class because they're more appropriate for that. And then I pick some of the more theoretical discussions for the live classes so I can explain it more versus the asynchronous classes. I don't know if that helps the answer, but yeah, I do change my material depending on the modality. All right, looks like we're wrapping up. So again, thanks everybody for attending. I appreciate it.
Mm.
And Tom, thank you very much for helping me.